Hello and welcome to this panel is the GMing for pay, deep thinking about how much work GMing is and what we think about the whole thing. I am Justus. I have with me Steve and Will, and we are going to be kind of discussing this topic about GMing for pay. I'll start first and just introduce myself since I'm already talking. Once again, my name is Justus. I am a GM for pay. I actually own a company where people pay for us to run games for them. And I also do GMing in a therapeutic realm as well, as I'm also a therapist. And yeah, so I run games for a wide population, from teenagers to adults, and different aspects as well. So that's a little bit about me. I'll kick it over to Steve. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Steve D. I'm a game designer from Sydney, Australia. I also run the company Tin Star Games. I don't have any experience GMing for pay except at conventions occasionally and things like that. But I put together this panel originally because I was really interested about the topic. And yeah, I'm sort of coming as the average gamer perhaps in this conversation, wanting to know more, and curious about things like how can I perhaps get paid to be a GM? Where's the money I should have got for the last 20 years as a GM and things like that. I'm interested in this whole topic, and I'm hoping we can really dive into all the things that all the questions that this brings up.
Okay, yep. And my name's Will. Uh, I have done. I guess I'm somewhere in between. I don't make. I don't have a company or GM for pay as part of my job, but I have GM for paid for pay at game stores and online, especially in the last 2 years. Where one of the things I want to talk about is how much has increased the last 2 years and what difference online gaming makes to it. But um, but for me, it's something I do, and actually, and just to get games together. In some ways, honestly, for me, it's purely a hobby. It's not something I expect to ever make much money. If I actually did the back of the envelope calculations to see what it actually take to make a living as a GM for pay. Um, so, so for me, it's to look at to see how it affects the games themselves, how it affects the relationship with the players, and how it all works out, and what the difference are gemming for pay. And why you might like in my case, sometimes I prefer it over to doing with free people, especially free games with strangers.
Yeah.
Yeah. hmm
We should say, of course, that
Okay.
if you're watching this on Twitch, please send us some questions. Andy, our tech guy, will feed them to us. We want to make sure that we are responding to your questions and talking about the things that you're interested in as well. So yeah, that's a really, I mean, that's a lot of things you said there, Will, are really important. Like there is, even though the people are being paid, it's still a hobby pay thing. So there is a lot of grey areas. Perhaps we should talk about the fact that there are lots of ways that you can get paid as a GM,
hmm
from just informal arrangements with your friends to at a store, at a convention, and then all the way up to actually running a business. I think that's probably getting into the whole thing about this psychology is that there has to some extent always been some understanding that the GM has more responsibility and more work to do. Would that be fair?
Yep, I think so. Yeah. I mean,
Agree with
and the
that? Yeah.
exceptions are relatively recent.
Right.
There are
Yeah.
games out now where the intention is that there is no person with more responsibility than others, but most of those are relatively recent, and the assumption always has been that there's one person who's more in charge of facilitating everything, and even if they're not, and usually doing the plotting and most of the making sure things happen in the game,
Mm. That's a
both
good
on
way
the
to put it.
back end and the front end. Both during the
Yeah.
game and also before just getting right together. Yeah.
Yeah. Facilitating is definitely a big issue. That's something that came up when we were talking about this before we launched the panel. Is that probably the most primary duty of GMs, and I think this is definitely true from what I've heard, is that the GM's job, that well, a huge chunk of the GM's job is not running a game, but organizing a game and facilitating the event. Um, that's something that came up really quickly in our conversation. I think it was you, Justice, who said that it was like most of your job, or was it maybe it was Will?
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone that's been a GM has had that struggle of like, all right, we got to coordinate. I got to coordinate the players because
Yep.
it's just an assumed responsibility since you are the quote unquote leader of that game as the
Yeah.
GM that I think a lot of GMs take on. It's not always the case, but yeah, there's definitely something to be said, like coordination and scheduling and making sure everyone, shows up to the table. It can be a challenge, I think, for a lot of GMs.
Hmm.
Mm.
I mean, I mentioned this story before, but I found actually, and it's a strange thing, but I find it's actually easier when they're paying you for it.
Yeah.
It's
That
actually
makes me.
easier it's actually easier to organize the game when people are actually invested in paying for it. It actually makes the games much more reliable to go forward. Like I said, this really became obvious. Well, actually, this is really obvious in two cases for me. Running games in stores.
Yeah.
Um, uh, I find that stores have a terrible attendance rate, if they're offering the games for free when I've run a game at a store. I've had more games just flop when they were free than when they were paid at a store. Um, and then online too. And I think it comes down to straight being, and I think it's because the assumption for a long time was that you're playing campaigns with your friends. That was
Mm.
the assumed standard thing, and so there was a lot of communication. Everybody was together. You were scheduling, and making that happen. But when you're in a different environment, all those social pressures to actually get there are gone.
Yep.
There just isn't that feeling of social obligation to show up.
Mm.
And that can make it really hard to organize games with strangers. You
Yep.
know?
Yeah, and that's a good point that when we're talking about the psychology here, we're also talking about other psychologies that are involved. So there's the psychology of strangers versus friends. There's the psychology
Hmm.
of being at an event versus being in someone's house. But I think what you said there is actually probably really true for less strangers games, or that I think once people put in a bit of money for it, they are perhaps more likely to show up. Um, even so especially if you're inviting someone in who is a GM that you don't know that well, which is sometimes the model. Like 4 or 5 friends get together, they go, "We want to play a game. We're going to pay someone to come to our house and run for us." I
Hmm.
think that's going to cause people to show up a lot more. Um, so that's something I think and
Yeah.
I think that's something that's really worth being aware of because in my experience and anecdotally, role playing games are something that people flake on a lot. Like it is famously hard to organize the sessions over and over again. And it was, I often compare it to things like if you were joining a bowling league, you would pretty much have to show up every week for the league, and you would, unless you had something really pressing. But gamers tend to be a bit more casual, like with role playing. They're like, well, it's only an RPG. I can miss it this week. Once we add this like a little bit of payment, and again, there would be payment if you're going to a bowling alley or something, you'd put in some money. If you're going to a trivia team, maybe there'd be even some of that as well because you're competing for a prize. Some of this sort of formality and some of this I guess cash input is going to get people to show up a bit more and probably also have a bit more of a connection at the table.
Hmm.
Justice, do you do that sort of thing where like a group of people hire you to come to them?
Yeah, and generally that's kind of like you mentioned, Steve, is it's usually a group of friends. It's
Yeah,
somebody. It's not usually somebody that says post a flyer, say, "Hey, I'd like to play a game," but it's usually people who know each other. And so I have
yeah,
done where I went to go to their house. We also, since we have a Discord server, we run a lot of games online. So if people have reached out that way too, hey, we all live across the country, but can we all play a game? And
yeah,
like, yeah, you bet. And so, yeah, I mean, you get that the players put a lot of work into the characters, but when you add that extra little, like, you put in some money for this, that it's a literal buy-in, but it also does, like, mentally, I think, it encourages you to come to the game because you're like, you know what, I literally bought into this, um, and everyone else did too. So yeah,
mm,
I agree with Will as well as that like the attendance seems to be better when it is a paid game because I've done non-paid games as well, and that happens. It's sometimes especially campaigns just die off because life happens. It's
yeah.
it is what it is.
Do they tend to go longer? You find if people are paying? There's famously that they did a survey that found that like the average D&D game lasts 9 or 10 sessions, um, and I'm wondering if that's partly because people just drift apart. But is it going to go longer with pay, or does pay mean more like we have to set a limit to this, where people go, we want to play X sessions?
Generally, in my experience, they are like a campaign is shorter, just
Hmm.
because from my perspective, I want the players to have a conclusion. They deserve a conclusion.
Yeah.
They first of all, they paid for this, and the second of all, they put a lot of work into their characters. So there should be a conclusion to, the campaign. So there is that pressure, like, yeah, we got to make sure this happens, or I have to make sure this happens. So I'm gonna, set a limit. Also, that way the players know the dates ahead of time. If
Right.
we decide to extend out and pass, that's fine. But I want to respect the players' time as well. So yeah, I think the shorter campaigns are what I lean towards to for when I do paid games. But we do have a GM on our server that does do longer games. He does
Hmm.
is doing currently a 6-month campaign. And the players have been showing up every week for that. So, in my perspective, that would be very hard, but it is doable. But yeah, I would say generally the games are shorter with paid games.
Yeah, now let me say, I realize I'm not sure I mentioned this when I introduced myself. I've played quite a bit with Justus, including paying him or being in games he paid, and I've actually done some GM for pay on his server. Though I've also done actually more, I think, off the server before then. Um, but yeah, but that is also my experience. That
Hmm.
I've never been in a paid GM that was open ended.
Yep.
It was always a set time, usually 4 to 5 sessions, I think, or one-offs. Actually, most of what I'd run for paid GMing before we're going to time travel our games were one-offs.
Hmm.
Um, Many of them being like several of them, there are people who want like people, hey, I want to know how to play this, and they say I'd actually go and respond to them in a Discord server or at a gaming store and introduce somebody to Fate or introduce somebody to I've done a couple of Rissus one shots. In that case,
Hmm.
I was advertising them, not the people, but um, but that is my experience too. I've never had a long campaign
Yep.
of a paid game. Now, understand to me, a long campaign is not 6 months.
Yeah.
I'm used to most of my campaigns I've run multiple years, but in my
Right.
like not paid ones. But I've never been in a paid one or tried to run a paid one that I expected to last more than about a month. Or I guess,
Yeah. So,
well, yeah. Hmm.
that comes back, I guess, to the question a little bit about about expectations, and that there's a sense that players want there to be more of a story and more of an ending, and that's, I guess, less casual for a GM. But there's also some GMs that, I mean, it can actually be more work to do the big sprawling campaigns with all the what do they call
Yeah.
it, the open world situations and things like that. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, so uh, that I mean, I think to me says though that I think most people, when they're coming to this, they're wanting a very story focused experience, um, and to some extent leaving expecting the GM to take a bit more control. Would you agree with that?
Uh, I'm not sure I agree with that, but I do feel there's an obligation to be more explicit about expectations before the game starts than there is
Mm,
in when there's a page jam. I think there's an obligation, or at least there should be an obligation, or it's very valuable to make sure everybody's on the same page before you start about what
yeah.
the game's going to be like. Uh, it's good practice anyway, really, the whole
Mm,
session zero thing that regardless of what you're doing. But I do feel it to be more explicit and formalized
yeah.
for a paid game.
Yeah. I think that's something that
Yeah.
uh, what's encouraging to me about this is that I think the fact that there's a professional element to GMing has made people who even who don't GM for money to take stock, as we said at the start, about what expectations are and what are the duties of a GM. And um, even if you're not doing it for money, to go, okay, let's actually appreciate what's going on and drill down into what a GM is doing and what those expectations are. And as you say, setting up contracts and things like that. What was I going to say on that note that you just said? No, can't think of it. It's very early in the morning here for me.
No worries.
So oh, well, yeah. So speaking of expectations, though, like when I was preparing for this panel, I talked to a lot of people about their thoughts about it, and people. One thing that kept coming up is that people felt that the expectations were very much higher. So GMs were not willing to do it. Either they tried it for pay and it felt weird, they felt like they had to work a lot harder, or they were shying away from it because they know when they work for pay, it changes how much fun they have and things like that. So, do you think that this could make people less keen to GM and just more likely to just go,
Yeah.
well, we'll just pay
So
somebody? Justice,
yeah,
yeah.
so I can talk to that a little bit. Yeah. So I mean, as I've run free games, I've run paid games, and I mean psychologically for me, knowing it's a paid game, especially at first, I get a little more nervous. I'm like, okay, I feel like expectations are higher. Um, but as I went along, it's more about like, I've had some great GMs that have run free games for me. I've had great GMs that have run paid games, and really, there's it, there's not much difference in like the GM of the GM's job of creating that space for you to the players to have fun. You have
Mm-hmm.
set expectations. You have safety tools in place, so the players feel safe. And now we have an environment for which players can have fun in. And like I said, the first few times I felt like expectations were higher for me as a paid GM, but I, when I just boil it down to that, like this is what I'm doing as a GM, creating that environment for them to be able to essentially play in. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I don't. Once I kind of got to that in my own head of like this is my goal as a GM. I didn't feel like there was any more expectations on me, or it was like harder. Like psychologically at first, yes, but I don't know. I feel like I kind of got past that a little bit.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with Justice. And it does too. One thing I did find is that I only do page gen for light games, rules light games. I do not
Mm-hmm.
do, for instance, do page jamming for D&D because I've never done more work for a game than my personal D&D campaign I ran. Um,
Yeah.
and and for me, I was looking, and it's for me the part I really enjoy and the part that I think I came to the conclusion that the most fun to the players did nothing to do with any of that work.
Mm.
Um, I was enjoying it. I was enjoying doing some of that work. I was enjoying the set pieces. I was enjoying I was enjoying doing that. But then again, I said if I'm going to be, I'm more confident that I get a good game out of a players in a light game than I was in, um, D&D. And also, of course, it is less prep. Um,
Yeah.
but I know I think because my opinion is there is a little bit more. I'm a little bit less risk taking in a paid game.
Right. Yeah.
I will not take risks with like experimental stuff like I would in my personal games. Um, so if I'm gonna do something in a paid game, I'm gonna do something I'm confident is gonna work.
Yeah.
So that's something that is, as far as expectations and pressure, I'm not going to gamble that I'm not going to make a gamble that I think might end up having the game crash. That I
Mm-hmm.
think this could just come to a screeching terrible halt. Uh, because if that's a personal game, it's like, oh well, this didn't work. Let's try something else next time,
Mm.
and go forward. In a paid game, you don't want to do that, and that's a cycle of pressure. I feel like there's a minimum require. Like I gotta make sure there's at minimum we reach a certain level of fun for the game.
Yeah.
But I don't feel any fear about not being able to do that. So that I guess at that point, I'm confident. I'm pretty confident in my ability to sit down, have a basically fun game. So I don't feel much stress pressure over that. It's the pressure not to experiment. I do feel pressure though to be consistent, to make sure that I'm not gonna, that I'm not gonna be, you know, doing that we're not gonna go way outside. And that's again part of the expectations too. Making clear expectations are there.
Mm.
Possibly somebody could pay me to do an experimental game and like, hey, look, guys, come on, know this could crash and burn. I mean, hey, people pay to go to Metopia to play playtests, knowing that there's a 90% chance that game's going to crash and burn.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
there's fun in
Yeah.
that. If you know going in, that's fun. But not for a standard, game.
Interesting. Yeah. Has anyone ever asked for their money back in any of your games?
I've never had
That
anybody ask for
has
money
oh, sorry.
back. No, good.
Yeah.
But
Sorry, I was just to
but
say that go
yeah,
ahead,
go.
Steve. Sorry.
That or complained or asked for changes.
No, I've never had anybody ask for money back. I have kicked people out of the store. I've kicked players out of the store in a paid game in the past.
Interesting. Yeah.
And the store, in that case, the store and every other player there and the store owner backed me up on those. So I've had players that I've never had one ask me for the money back, but I have had to kick players out. And I don't know how. I honestly don't know how that worked out in their money for the store because that was a store game, and I actually don't know if they demanded their money back. But I have had to kick players out of games, but I've never had one personally in one game I was actually handling the money because that is a whole other thing. It's a big difference. A store game, they're not paying you direct; they're paying the store. So I actually was not involved in the money side on that one. So I don't know if he demanded his money back. But I've had people. I've never had somebody walk out in a game I've run. So, except the convention game. I've had a person leave during a convention game, but that's the only time.
What about you, Justus? With I imagine with you running a whole business and things, there may be more aspects of expectation and controlling money and things like that.
Yeah, I Time Traveler Games actually hasn't run, as far as I'm aware, any games that I've run with them, or with my company, has never had to, we've never had anybody ask for their money back. But I think that's part of setting up the environment, and having those safety tools. Like X and O cards, I've had people use X cards in games where if we wouldn't have had that safety tool set up, they might have left, and I wouldn't have blamed them because that, for as far as I'm concerned, that's part of setting up that environment and creating a safe and fun place for people to play in. So yeah, I haven't had that happen. Like Will said, I have had to have people leave the table or leave the game. And that's basically because they weren't following the safety tools, the lines and veils that we set up before game, or after multiple talks of crossing the line with things like safety tools. It was impacting the other players in a negative way, and at that point, you got to make a call.
Yeah. Now, Justice, I want to know, does this ever factor you on the therapy? In your in the therapy business, where you've had, so I think in there you're getting paid indirectly, right? It's not them literally. It's not the actual person paying you directly most of the time.
Yeah. So essentially, I mean, so I work at a youth correctional facility, and I run a therapy group, D&D, with the kids there. And so it's not them paying for it. It's technically the insurance company. So it's an interesting dynamic because it's essentially a free game for them, because they never see the financial side of it. But it is a paid game for me. But it's therapy. Like, there's a lot of things we work on in there. So what's really interesting to me is that working with youth, they're really they catch on really quick. They may never have played anything, and even though they're in our facility for negative reasons or negative behaviors, also we set up safety tools. And very rarely will I have to say, "Hey, watch out! There's a line there," because one of the players will say, "Hey, just to let you know, that's one of our lines. We don't, we're not going to talk about sex or go over that line." And I'm like,
Mhm.
wow. When I first started, I was like, wow, this is crazy. Like, I just saw you cuss out a staff 5 minutes ago, but now we're in the game, and you're respecting these rules because you really, well, first of all, you enjoy the game, and you have that environment of which you want to play and learn in with these people. So I have never had to kick anyone out of a therapy group, because for whatever reason they all really, just kind of got it.
Mm,
It's weird to me. I've had more trouble with people over the age of 18 than I have with the teens I work with.
mm,
Uh,
yeah.
that's actually something. One of the things I want to talk was how it changes, like how the player thinks during the game. That's what I know the
Yeah.
topics we wanted to talk about before, and that applies to that too. Which I do see different behavior now. I see different behaviors from, like I said again, especially games with strangers. I see very
Yeah.
different behavior in a paid game than a free game.
Yeah.
Games with friends are totally different. But with strangers, like I see very different behavior in a free game and um, free game than a paid game. And I'm talking about in stores and online, especially online.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, Games I've run, I've had some disasters of free games online.
Yeah.
And I've never had a disaster paid game online.
Interesting.
You
Yeah,
know,
I think it definitely would. It's going to shape the psychology of players, particularly strangers. But what about with friends? Like, I mean, let's imagine that there's people out there watching this who are like, "Well, I've been running for my friends for 5 years. Should I ask them for money?" Have any of you done that sort of transition to like, or at least with people have played with people that you know well, or is it just
so,
always mostly a business relationship with strangers? Sorry, Will, go.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
I'll actually, yeah,
mhm,
I'll speak to that. So I actually do have a free play campaign that I've been doing for the past 2 years for some of my
mhm.
friends, and that's been going. It's been going fine. They all enjoy it. Um, but that's like three of my friends. The
Mhm.
rest really hadn't had any experience with it and didn't want to. It was the weirdest thing until like I started my company, and then I had friends asking, "What is this about?"
Right.
And
Right.
what's going on
Yeah.
here? I'm like, "Well, just yeah, just come in and play a game." And so it was interesting that I've had, well, and one of my friends from the free campaign that I've been running, like the free to play campaign, I've had him come in the server as well. It In my experience, it hasn't really affected any of my relationships with them. Like they seem to understand that like this is a business.
Mhm.
They they understand that this that yeah, just the business aspect of it. Like you set the criteria of this is a paid game, and they're like, oh, great, cool, sure. Um,
that
I
kind of
I
relates to
don't
what.
think. Sorry,
Go,
well,
Will.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead. Okay, I
I was
wanted
say
to elaborate on what he said about they came with the server and they were fine with paying. My experiences is all about environment.
Mm.
I've run paid games for friends at game stores,
Yep.
and there's not been the slightest peep of, well, you shouldn't be charging me. I'm your friend. Like it didn't even occur to enter anybody's mind and it's all
Yep.
about the environment. Now I have not run paid games for my friends at home or even
Right.
over the internet. Though again, if I invited them over the for Kind Traveler Games, I don't they'd be understand that games run here are for pay. What I have is the other way around. People I first met at a paid game becoming friends.
Mm.
Um, and that has happened. And even to the point of inviting them, some of them actually end up in a free, some free games I've run in
Mm.
the past. So that's something that can happen. I've seen it to go the other way, but I feel like as far as it pay for games seems recent stories have always been about environment.
Yep.
They seem to understand that some environments are business and you pay
Mm.
there. And so I've never paid I've never charged for a game run at my house. It just
Yep.
never, like never. If you're coming to my house, it's for friends. I'm not inviting strangers over here. It's a game of between friends. Has
Mhm.
always been my experience with that. Yeah.
That comes back to the thing that we're sort of behind all this, that we're learning more about the GM through this, and I think that's something that people neglect all the time. That where you are and how you're sitting will really reflect how you play. Like if you're just sort of lying around on the couch, you're just going to be casual. But if you sort of go, even if you're in someone's house, but if you go into the game room and there's a big table and you're all sitting up in front of a piece of paper, you might be paying a lot more attention. And that's why I think some games, like with maps and figures, are just getting more energy out of players because they're leaning in and looking at those things. And yeah, I think that's sort of fascinating about helping us dial in on these issues. Something that occurred to me now is like I make my most prominent role is designing and publishing games. If I'm looking for someone to demo my game at a convention or just to get the word out there, most of what I do is tend to look for volunteers. Should I be looking for professional GMs, or is it just understood that that there is a semi-professional relationship because you're demoing my game? Have you guys ever done that as well? Like worked for a company like, please show off X for us, or has it all been other games that you don't have any connection to in that way, God?
No, the only thing close that I've done is actually through Double Exposure and their
Right.
their program. And honestly, I didn't do much of that because I've never actually I have demoed games for people, but it was always because those people were interested in that game, and so it was
Yeah.
never the company requesting it. It was always the people in the actual game requesting it. Um, Double Exposure does run theirs. I did do like a couple of Fate ones with them a couple
Hmm.
years ago, but no, I've never actually been paid by a company to demo their game.
Right.
Yeah.
Justice, anything like that, or is it's all coming from the players for you?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's all coming from the players. Usually, if they want to run a game, they'll request it, and then we can
Mm.
figure out a GM for them. But yeah, I don't have any experience in that realm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something else that of course companies are looking into is people who run their games on stream. Now, you guys don't do that, I imagine either. It's all, well, except obviously, person to person, but not being presented over Twitch or anything like that.
Yeah.
Because that's another way to get paid to
No,
GM. Sorry, go.
sure, and no, we don't have that. Um, and one of the things that we've kind of kicked around is like, I don't know, that can, to me, that kind of seems like a privacy thing. Like if I'm going to play a game with my
Oh yeah.
friends, maybe I don't want that. I don't want everyone to know what my character did, or hear my voice, or whatever it may be. So we haven't ever done that, and I think that's totally fine if you want to do that. But yeah,
Hmm.
we haven't ever done that. And kind of keeping it, I don't know, enclosed in the game, I think helps with the
Yeah.
immersion as well.
So I've done something like that. I have
Hmm.
recorded a game I ran but I didn't charge anybody. But I recorded it because I want to try that out. I want to try out Twitch. I want not Twitch stream, but YouTube and Twitch and
Hmm.
putting it out there and recording. And I found there's a couple of issues that came up that aren't really so much in this thing. But the honest truth is, if you're doing that, the other players are collaborators. They're actors.
Mm.
They're contributing. They're not. They're not. You're not doing a service for them. They're always doing a
Yeah.
service for you. The other thing is that the money is terrible. Look, the money. It's look there. You're not going to make money just streaming. You have you'd have to go in there and get sponsors, and there's no way you're gonna make money just streaming. So there's not even enough to like you know pay for your time. Never mind any players. Um, but I agree that because you're talking to my friends, I also think that me personally, I would not be comfortable being paid by players and then putting that on the Twitch stream unless they were explicitly paying me because they want to be on Twitch. If they're
Right.
paying me because they want to be on Twitch, all right, then that's you've got whatever you want. But
Mhm.
no relationship is they just want to have a good time.
Mm.
They're not
Mm.
looking for fame. They just want a good time. And so I wouldn't be comfortable doing that unless they specifically said, "Hey, look, I want to be Twitch famous. I want to be on thing, and can you help me get Twitch famous? By running the game for me." Which but in normal thing, I wouldn't do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I was
It's
thinking.
about 6:05. I wonder, are there any questions in the chat?
There are indeed. Judd K had a couple questions. First off, what is the biggest shift a new professional GM needs to make when running games for pay?
Oh, that's an excellent question.
Mm,
Did that go to
Yeah.
audio?
yeah,
Yep.
I think
The
so, right?
audience heard that. Yep.
Mhm. Yes.
Um, Justice, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. Yeah. And it depends on the environment I think that you're going to do it in. But regardless, I think it starts with creating the environment around the game, the safety tools. Those are the big things. Like especially at a convention, you don't know who's going to show up at your table. You
Mm-hmm.
need those to make sure all your players are comfortable.
Yep.
So really the stuff before the game, I think a lot of people I think start out playing with friends, and there are assumed things that are okay and not okay. Well, I think as a paid GM, especially with strangers, you need to set those limits and boundaries very concretely so that everyone understands I'm not going to go past. There is going to be no harm to children in this game.
Yeah.
And so and you're also setting expectations as well that way. So I think that is if you're starting out trying to get in paid GMing, that's where you need to start. Otherwise, it's very possible you could lose players. Players could walk away from the table, that sort of thing. So just
Yeah.
making sure that everyone's in the environment is comfortable, and everyone can have a good time
Yeah.
within those rules.
Yeah.
Yep.
So for me, let me say I came at like page jamming. If you look at my certificate, it's a very gradual slope because
Mm.
I first started just going to conventions, which are kind of page jamming because you're getting some
Yeah.
compensation for running games, and then running games in stores, and then actually being directly paid. It was very different. So and when you're going so conventions and store games have certain assumptions that others do, and there's a lot of differences when you're running the game.
Yep.
There's a certain
Yep.
level of like attitude you have to have during the game, sort of seriousness almost during the game, and attention. You have to actively and professionally pay attention to how your other players are feeling and doing, and who's engaged, and in a way you can be more casual about in a friendly game. You got to be very careful watching to make sure everybody's talking during a store game and a convention game, that nobody's getting blocked out. You have to make sure nobody's looking upset. There's a lot of people watching that you
Yeah.
can just gloss over. Honestly, when you're with friends, that kind of stuff will come out. Friends will complain. There's a lot of people who will not complain in a public setting
Yeah.
when they really
Yeah.
should be.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Now and then online gaming, where you're scheduling things ahead of time, it's exactly what Justice said. A lot of conversation before you start. You can't have that conversation in a convention or a store game, but the store itself and the convention sort of sets expectations. There's certain level of
Yep.
professionals you expect there's going to be there's certain levels of expectations from those because of the setting. That's not there online. You have to have a lot of talk beforehand on an
Yep.
online game because an online game anything goes. There's no particular expectations of how people behave, how polite people are
Mm.
going to be, that you're not going to do certain topics. That there's no preset expectations on an online game, and you have to explicitly talk about that beforehand.
I imagine also it's different
Yeah.
if you can't, even if you can't see people's faces as well. There's less
Mm-hmm.
physical cues about whether that's appropriate, things like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's my first experience. It's a lot harder to keep track of who's talking in an online game. Honestly, yeah, it's got nothing to do with page jamming. Really, it's just yes, it's harder in an online game to notice who's not having fun.
Yep.
Mhm.
It is
Yeah,
definitely
because
harder. Yeah.
yeah, if we're looking into the psychology of it, we're losing 55% statistically, 55% of our communication if we can't see them.
Yep.
So yeah, I totally agree. I had a question for Steve. Steve, do you have GMs come to your store at all and like run games or do anything, or do you run games as a GM in your store?
I don't own a store. I publish games.
Oh, okay.
But I am in the position now where when I'm going to conventions, I'm often doing a million other things. So I'm paying GMs there to run at conventions or to run demos for me at stores. So I've done that a lot, and that's something. So yeah, again, I'm coming at this from that point of view. And of course, the first thing that I want to do is talk to my GM about how they're going to run the game. And as you said, the first thing that comes up is it has to be safe. It has to be accepting. It has to be an open table where everyone feels that they're involved and safe and having fun because I'm selling a product. So it's even more stakes, I guess. If someone walks away from a game of one of my RPGs, then I have a public relations nightmare as well as a concern for a player. I have to be like, we have to deal with this, and so a lot of what I do is it comes back to that question. I talk to my GMs a lot before they go to the table. I also make sure that they feel supported as well, because I want them to have the tools that they need and to know that if they make a call, like we said before, to say you're out of you need to leave, that I've got their back as well, because I'm sort of their employer in that regard. I'm not going to say turn to them and go, you shouldn't have kicked that player out. He wanted his money back. So that's coming back to setting a professional expectation, so that the GM feels safe to make those calls. But that's something that I'm looking at and thinking about how GMs do these kind of things and how to how to best tell them what I want and set up these kind of relationships. But I'm also trusting them to know what makes for a good game, which I think is. I think if someone has instincts, like GMing is I think someone said earlier when we were preparing for this, not everyone can GM, but I also think it can be quite an instinctive thing. If you have that sense of my job is to make everything fun for everybody, you've got the right attitude going in, and you can usually spot that, I think. So that's something that I think if your friends keep coming back and telling you they've had good games and keep showing up for your games, then you're probably someone who could do this for professionally. Do we have any other questions coming in?
We sure do.
Yep.
From Snapping Turtle 13, I've found that I put in more work as a player in paid games because it feels like a higher bar for storytelling all around the table. Do you, as a paid GM, have higher expectations for your players?
Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah, that's
That's
something
a
that.
great question.
Yeah.
My
Will?
quick answer is I don't have higher expectations, but I do find that they meet them more often. Yeah, I find that's absolutely true. I don't particularly expect more, except I do, like I said, a certain level of politeness and that you would not necessarily have with friends, where you're ribbing each other. I expect you don't want to have that kind, but in the actual but I find that people I don't expect more from involvement, but I'm getting it. Especially again versus free games with strangers.
Yeah.
You know, so I absolutely do see the more involvement from players if they're paying for it than if we were just a free pickup game, organizing some Discord server.
Are we worried about players not wanting to show up because it's like, oh, it's a paid game, I'm not ready for that? Or do we think there's any of that? Or is it just people that make their way in because they pay? Well, no. If they're making that decision, do you think players are ever going to back away because they're like, oh, it's a paid game, I can't compete? I mean, I've been to some of the games at Gen Con where they're the special ones for they're sort of for high level role players, and sometimes I'm like, well, I don't have the improv skills for that. You guys run into anything like that where people are like, this is too hard for me, or this requires this? There's an expectation that I don't think I can meet.
Yeah, so I don't think I have not run into that in any of the games I have run. And also we're not streaming, we're not at a convention on a stage or whatever, so
Yeah.
there's not that level of expectation. But honestly, I don't think that I've run into that. It seems, and again, I'm going to go back to setting up that environment. If you want to put forth whatever it is as a player, that's fine. If you want to sit back as a player, that's okay too. There's the bare minimum stuff, like you need to have if there's a character creation setting, be there, create your character. Like Will said, be polite. There's a minimum level to meet. But I've actually kind of experienced the opposite, where I've had some players that were tend to sit back more, and then they got in with more talkative players, and it actually balanced out. It brought out more in the less talkative players, and the more talkative players sat back a little bit more. So yeah, I haven't experienced that where like I personally expect more from the players, or the other players expect more from that player. It's just whatever that environment. I feel like it's the environment that is set. Like like if it's at a convention, it might seem a little higher. Whereas it's just a game on a server or with your friends, it would seem a little lower, the expectations.
Yeah, I agree. I've had games at stores where people have got stage fright. I've been at games store where people have gotten stage fright, but not because they were paying for it, because they were at a store. They were in a very public place.
Yeah.
I've seen stage fright from that, and that's people can climb up, and that's tough. I mean, that's really hard to re-engage somebody when that happens. It's it's very very hard, and you have to be very very gentle. It's very slow. It's not ever fully successful, honestly. It just you're never going to completely get them in the course of in the course of a 4-hour session. You're never going to get some of it, but you can get them more comfortable. I do explicitly tell people, hey, look, we're not looking for voices here. That is something I've had people who they think expecting acting voices, because we also have some players. Well, Justus knows who I'm talking about specifically, who just do voices. They just belt it what they do without that, and yet it's explicit. I don't. I'm not anything like an actor. Okay. And that helps us, I think, in some ways, because they feel like, well, if the GM's not doing it, I've got no obligation to do it. But I do am explicit that we're not expecting, you to try to put on a character voice. Just talk, what your character would do. Just be in character doesn't mean acting.
Yeah,
That's something. Being in character does not mean acting. It's something that does have to. I've had to prepare, but I don't think it has anything to do with paid GMing. I think that's just the environment and the people you're doing it with, and feeling insecure. Sometimes you feel like somebody's better than you at it. Other players be better than you at it. Yeah.
That's definitely a thing that I think is always worth talking about, because I think there's a lot of that, particularly when you're at conventions where you've got people with very different sort of, not so much abilities, but preferences, like people who are very actory or improv-y. You can feel very, very intimidated or excluded by that, and that's something that a good GM can sort of set the tone early on and just go, you can do that, but it's not required, to help people feel accepted. Certainly that came up when I was talking to people about their thoughts about this. A lot of GMs were like, well, if you ask for money, I have to do voices, I have to make handouts, I have to make maps. I feel like but you guys are all shaking your heads, so that's
not at all.
Yeah.
My is the only obligation you have as a paid GM is to make sure everybody's having a good time.
Perfect. Yeah.
That's literally it. And it's not. Yeah.
And I think. Sorry, real quick. Something that I've noticed is, I know online when we just do voice, we lose that 55% of communication, but that does help some people, like kind of interact with the game more. Whereas if you're sitting in a room with a bunch of strangers, that can be super intimidating, at times. So that I've noticed that does help in that aspect.
Yeah,
well, like I said, I've never had somebody have stage fright online. I've had people shut down at stores because suddenly they realize that there's a stranger, a stranger at the table. Maybe a stranger just came in and sitting at the table next door, and suddenly they realize that they've listened to what they're saying, and they just shut down. That has been a problem I've encountered at stores, but never had that happen online. Yeah.
That's a good reminder that role playing can be quite intimate and exposing for people. And that's why the Justus is doing it in a psychological and healing way, which is fascinating. I assume that you are. Well, do you have any psychological training in that? And is there extra pay and extra safety techniques going in for that kind of arrangement, or is it just mostly the same?
Yeah, so I am a licensed therapist. So I do, I do psychotherapy, talk therapy, but also I do this GMing or this D&D group. And so with the safety tools, like that's something that we set up. We have lots of teens that have lots of trauma. So, I'm going to role model, like for safety tools, lines and veils, you know what? We work with all different types of populations. So I'm gonna, as a something that makes me uncomfortable is racism. So that's going to be a line for me. We're, whether it's fantasy slurs or or real world. So in that way, I can role model for the kids, and then they feel more encouraged to put things up for lines and veils, and really giving them the power has helped a lot. Having those X cards, O cards, and being like, wait, I can just say no to this. I'm like, yeah, you can. And that's been really powerful for a lot of the teams I've worked with. And I mean, along with that, you just kind of you look at what are my therapeutic goals? What are my intentions for this session? And
Yeah.
so if a kid has impulse control issues, we're gonna work on that. We're gonna stick a lever in a room, and now the fighter has to dealing with a difficult person, and now we got a problem solved together. So there's a lot of foresight going into it, and it's just managing what do we want to work on, what are my intentions, and then also, as we know, games can kind of take a different route.
Mhm.
And I've had that happen too, where you go in thinking, okay, we're going to do strategic problem solving with a combat, and the kid said, no, I'm going to go talk to my character's dad, and now we're working on family dynamics. So it
Mm.
can shift like that, but that's when I'm like, okay, you haven't talked to your dad in a while, kind of talk with your group, how are you going to do this? And then that gives me time to say, okay, in my head, what are we going to work on here? Because this is a
Yeah.
quick
Yeah.
switch. So yeah, there's definitely lots of foresight and intention setting before I go in on a therapeutic level.
Mm.
Oh,
Yes, sir. Go.
yeah, like I say, we're talking about, for paid GMing. They talk about, you hear about these people worrying about preparing and setting up, so on. You can improv. The ability to improvise is everything. You can't, for instance, railroading is probably the worst thing you can do in a paid GM
Mhm.
thing. Your friends might forgive you, but a paid group will not for railroading. You
Yeah.
have to be. They have to remember they are in the driver's seat of the story. Always. That's
Mhm.
actually something I think we haven't actually brought up. You have to always
Mm.
be mindful that they're in the driver's seat of the story.
Yeah.
That should always be true. Any game you're playing, anyway, any game you're jamming. But it's absolutely vital if you're, when you're doing paid jamming, because you have an obligation to them.
Yeah.
You have an obligation to them that that it's their story.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So
Mhm.
people
Yeah.
are perhaps emphasizing the wrong things about GMing. Maybe
Mhm.
when they think about play, it's just more about tapping into your responsibilities. And again, like this whole thing is about figuring out what a GM does, and it's more about facilitating everyone's fun. That's
Mhm.
what this discussion has put into the spotlight, um, and modeling that and setting those expectations and things like that. Should we take a few more questions? Maybe we only got about 10 minutes left.
Yeah.
That's actually a really good segue into the next question, which
Great.
is does getting paid, also from Jed K, does getting paid make you hesitant to execute dire consequences from game
Ooh,
mechanics when money is on the table?
Um,
And
yeah.
can that be helped by setting expectations at the start?
so for me, answer is absolutely not. As long as you can tell it is in for it.
Yeah.
Uh, I have pulled back from. I just last weekend I had a total party kill at a convention, and everybody was in
Right.
for it. Because that just it made absolute sense as things were going. And it was a great time and everybody had fun. You know, it was a total party kill. Everybody had fun. The bomb went off. That
Yeah.
So I know as long as everybody but you got to make sure everybody's on the same page. There are people who will lose it if their characters die. There really are.
Yeah.
And you have to be aware of that. You have to be again. It's why I say you have to be watching them.
Mhm.
You have to watch them. Yeah.
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 And that definitely makes it a little tricky in like if you have a paid 5 sessions. It's
Oh,
like,
Mm.
okay,
yes,
we
I was
got to
thinking of
make
one shots. Yes.
Oh yeah, yeah, and one shots, yeah. It's definitely setting those expectations. Like there's a Call of Cthulhu game I'm running that it's like, hey, just let you know one hit kills are a thing in this game. It's
Yeah.
notorious for it. So heads up. So setting those expectations beforehand. But when it comes to like more than a one shot, then it's
Yeah.
you set those expectations still, and some people are okay with creating a new character, some people are not, and at that point it's then you got to go talk to your player. Is this, are you okay with this? Or maybe they said they were and now they're not. Okay, so
Mm.
how do we do this? So now there's this eldritch god that apparently you've made a deal with, and now you have a new problem, is you have to go do something for them, and so now
Mm.
you also created a new plot point.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's managing those expectations as they, in the beginning, but also as they come up.
So something that's easy to
Mm.
overlook. The X card applies to your character dying as well.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Okay, that's easy to overlook, but it absolutely, because people feel like, oh, I've lost somehow, my character dies. I can't just take. No, the X card applies to your character dying also. You can say,
Yeah.
no, look,
That's a
no,
really good point.
I don't want my character dead, and that's absolutely, and any game where you're playing with, that should be an option, and that's, I mean, in that is probably something that is different from a game with friends. No, even a game with friends, you should be able to say, look, I love this character, don't kill them. They should be able to ask
Yeah.
that, and you formalize it in a paid game where it's like, you have to be clear. Look, no, X card, just they're not dead. That did not
Yeah.
happen. Um,
Awesome.
so, and I agree actually with Josh. I think, in a long running game, you should explicitly get the player to agree their character dies in
Yeah.
a game that's gonna be more than one session. Absolutely. And also early in the session, like you should never cut the game character out of the game. Like I said, it was a total party. It was literally, we were already 10 minutes over the time the game was supposed to end.
Yep.
So there was no lost time. You should not take the player's time away from them.
Mm.
They need to be there the whole time.
Yep.
So that is a change in
Yep.
expectation, like
Yep.
on dire consequence. Like as far as death goes, you shouldn't have the world blow up 30 minutes into the game, obviously.
Mhm.
Okay. Yep.
Thank you.
Any other
More-
questions?
Any more questions?
One more question, also from Jed K, and you kind of covered this quite a bit, so maybe just a quick roundup or
Mhm.
one sentence to go out with. How do you deal with toxic interactions at a pay table? Same as at the
Mm.
home table, or is there a different approach that you would use? And I think you've covered this quite a bit already, but maybe one takeaway for folks.
My takeaway is 3 strikes. It has to be 3 strikes out.
Okay.
It's not like at home. It's not all like at home. It's very much like at a convention, but it's not all like at home.
Mm.
3 strikes, first time, gentle warning, second time, strict warning, third time, you're out. You're out. You have to be strict about it because you can't spend time on them when you have 3 to 4 other players in
Mm.
there. It's just,
Mhm.
that's
think-
my
I think-
opinion on it.
I think it's a good point. Like when you're doing something for pay, especially at a convention where there's a time limit, you have to be really kind of strict on that. If you are talking about any kind of toxic play, if you do have time, the question is why is it happening? And sometimes it's just like it can happen by accident in the sense that that person sat down with a very different expectation, and you often at a convention or a thing, you're just like, well, I'll just let this roll because that guy thinks that this is the game and will just be this is the game where that happened. But I think if it does cross a line, it's actually better to just go, hang on, we need to slow this down. I need to just not judge you, but we need to talk about, is everyone having fun with this? And go, can you that's not tolerated, or can you pull this back or something like that? It's worth constantly checking in and like we've talked about over and over again, is like using the X card is not just like a card. It's also that understanding that you can cut the action anytime and go, hang on, this isn't what I was expecting, this is not how I saw this scene, this is not what I want, can we restart or rewind or something? And I think being just aware of that all the time is that you can just go, hang on, let's think about what's going on outside the game, is just a good approach in any game.
Yeah.
Just as
Yeah.
one.
Yeah,
Yep.
I would parrot what you guys basically have said already. Yeah. I agree. 3 strikes, you're out. If you talk to them and talk to them again, and third time you got to talk to them, they got to leave the table. But it's like, and it's for those major things like breaking safety tools.
Right,
And
yes.
you got to, and that's why you talk to them. Hey, this, in a one-shot convention. Hey, remember our lines. These are our lines. And do a gentle reminder. But if they're, it's different if it's like I forgot about that line or veil or whatever it is, rather than it keeps happening. And you
Yep.
can tell it's in, they're just not, they're not following the safety tools. And you know what? There's more than, there's generally more than one player at the table. So, we got to make, as a facilitator, you got to make sure everyone's having fun, everyone's comfortable, and that environment that you create is a good one, is a safe one, and not toxic. And we can all just have fun.
Yep.
Okay, good.
Time to we've got a minute left, so we have to tell everyone where to find us. I'm Steve D from Tin Star Games. You can find me at Tin Star Games, like tin like the metal, and there's a 1 at the end of that on Twitter, at Tin Star Games 1, or tinstargames.com for all my RPGs and card games. Justus, you're at Kind Traveler?
Yes, you can find me at kindtravelergames.com. We have a website that will lead you to our Discord. We also have a Facebook page as Kind Traveler Games. If you search it up on Facebook, you can reach myself there. And yeah, hope to hear from you guys and maybe even play some games with you.
Absolutely.
Yep. Yep, and actually, probably the best way if you want to reach me, I don't have a professional webpage or Twitter account or anything like that. So the best way is actually probably through Kind Traveler Games because I do run games through them.
Fantastic.
Yep.
Thanks for great questions, everyone, and a great panel.
Okay.
And we'll see you around Metatopia.
Yep.
Now
Thanks,
we're just going
guys.
to wait
Thank you.
for the switch to be cut off.